When the time came for me to move on from Coconut Fred onto Wild Grinders, I knew there were several things that I had to take note of. One of those things being the way that both shows rip off their respective Nicktoon. Coconut Fred is a ripoff of SpongeBob SquarePants in several different aspects. Both shows have completely different premises, aside from the fact that they both share a tropical theme. However, there are specific character tropes that are taken from SpongeBob, as well as episode ideas and whatnot, specific things from SpongeBob that are taken and put into Coconut Fred. Wild Grinders is a ripoff of Rocket Power. However, the only thing that really makes it a ripoff is its premise. Both shows revolve around kids who are into extreme sports and whatever, skateboarding and whatever, pulling off tricks, anything of that sort. Now, I'm gonna go ahead and admit that I never really watched Rocket Power all that much when I was a kid. I don't even know if I actually watched it at all when I was a kid. I have like almost zero memories of it at all. From what little I remember about the show, it was a cartoon that was very much of its time. This show ran from 1999 to 2004, and I feel like only in that time period could the show have been made. And so when you get a ripoff of the show that ran from 2012 to 2015, yeah, it's going to feel a lot more awkward in comparison. But here's the thing that makes Wild Grinders different from Coconut Fred. Well, okay, there's a lot of things that make them different, but here's one thing that makes them different. I never really had a problem with the SpongeBob similarities that are present in Coconut Fred. To me, it was just kind of funny how blatant of a ripoff it was of SpongeBob. It was not something that like I got angry over, but I could see why people criticize Coconut Fred for being a SpongeBob ripoff, especially since SpongeBob is a famous, beloved cartoon that everyone knows and loves. In contrast, I don't think there's anyone out there that's going to criticize Wild Grinders for being a Rocket Power ripoff, because I don't think there's anyone out there that cares about Rocket Power that much. When it comes to the 5 cartoons that are being ripped off in this video, you have a show that's complete garbage, a show that not a lot of people really care about all that much, and 3 classics, and that's it. I mean, granted, 3 out of 5 is basically over half of the shows, but still. Now, despite the many differences between Coconut Fred and Wild Grinders, there's one thing that the two shows have in common. The main problem that I have with both shows have nothing to do with the fact that they are ripoffs of their respective Nicktoons. With Coconut Fred, my main issue with it was not that it was a SpongeBob ripoff, but rather it was just because of its kind of obnoxious, annoying tone, and that's it. Likewise, my main issue with Wild Grinders is not, oh, it rips off Rocket Power. No, my main issue with it is that it's honestly a dull cartoon. Again, this isn't the worst cartoon I've ever seen on this series, but I'd be lying if I said that this was anything to like write home about at all. This is just a really dull, unremarkable show. There's nothing offensively bad in it. I mean, okay, there are rare instances where it could be offensively bad, but that's it. But watching through the show, all I could think of was, can I go back to watching Coconut Fred again? That was honestly a much better show than this. First things first, let us take a moment to acknowledge the art style of the show. Now, some of you could look at these screenshots and think that this show looks weirdly familiar, and the reason for that is because this show shares a very similar art style to The Nut Shack, which was a cartoon that I previously looked at on the Search for the Worst Cartoon, and as a matter of fact, it currently stands as the best cartoon I have looked at on the Search for the Worst Cartoon. In addition to that, I did bring up Wild Grinders in the Nut Shack Search for the Worst Cartoon that I made. I didn't know the name of the show at the time, but now, here you go, now I know the show, and yeah, I can confirm this is Definitely something that should be on the search for the worst cartoon. For some reason, when I went into Wild Grinders, my initial thought process was, okay, this show looks like The Nut Shack. The Nut Shack was a funny bad cartoon, so maybe this could be a funny bad cartoon as well. Yeah, no, that ended up not being the case at all. I would actually say that this show is arguably worse looking than The Nut Shack, even though they have extremely similar art styles. The Nut Shack came out in 2007, whereas Wild Grinders came out in 2012. I feel like this kind of art style is fitting for a trashy, edgy adult cartoon from the late 2000s, but it doesn't really feel the same. It doesn't really feel as fitting for a cartoon from the early 2010s that's intended for kids, if that makes sense. As stated before, this show ran from 2012 to 2015. This is easily the longest lasting of the 5 not Nickelodeon collection cartoons, and it also has the most episodes as well as a result of this. Naturally, I was not going to sit down and watch all 101 episodes of the show. I only watched like a small handful of them. And unless there's a standout masterpiece episode hidden within this show's library, akin to Sir Nut-A-Lot from Coconut Fred, I think this show is worse than Coconut Fred, honestly. It's just a really dull show. Kind of what you would expect from this like low budget cartoon from around this time. I guess in the same way Rocket Power was emblematic of the late 90s and early 2000s, this show was emblematic of the early 2010s. Just these like cheaply made, low-budget flash cartoons that would fall into obscurity not long after its release. As I said in the beginning of this video, this technically shouldn't be part of the Not Nickelodeon collection because this show actually did air on Nicktoons in the US at least. I'm not sure if it aired like elsewhere in other parts of the world. Most likely it did. Most likely in the US it aired on Nicktoons, but in other parts of the world it aired on like some other different channel. I don't know. But I still think it deserves to be in here despite this. Perhaps if this aired on the main Nickelodeon network and not on Nicktoons, then I would say like it doesn't count at all, and this would likely be like its own separate search for the worst cartoon instead of being part of the not Nickelodeon collection. But the fact that it's on the less popular channel, I think that makes it kind of more deserving of being here, if that makes sense. So the show is apparently loosely based on the childhood of serious creator Rob Dyrdek, who also happened to be a former professional skateboarder, which only makes me question even more if I should consider this a Rocket Power ripoff or not. That's another thing to take in as well. With the exception of Rocket Power, the 5 Nicktoons that are being ripped off in this video, they're all like popular, famous shows, you know? SpongeBob, Fairly Odd Parents, and Avatar The Last Airbender are all considered beloved classics. Everyone knows them, everyone loves them, and even though The Loud House is garbage, I unfortunately cannot deny that it is a very popular show. Nobody cares about Rocket Power all that much, so like it wouldn't really make sense for them to rip off this show that nobody cares about. You would think like, you know, if you're gonna rip off a show that's famous, rip off a show that everyone knows and loves. If this show came out around like the early to mid 2000s, like closer to when Rocket Power was airing, then yeah, I would probably call this a blatant ripoff just like that, but this came out in 2012. Who the cared about Rocket Power in 2012? I think the best way to describe Wild Grinders is it's an unintentional ripoff of Rocket Power. I look at Coconut Fred and I think, yeah, for sure the people behind this were trying to copy SpongeBob. I look at Pixel Pinky and I think, yeah, for sure the people behind this were trying to copy the Fairly Odd Parents. I look at this and I think, I mean, yeah, there are a lot of similarities to Rocket Power, but it feels more like a coincidence than anything else. Are there a lot of similarities between Wild Grinders and Rocket Power? Yeah, there are. Is it fair for me to call Wild Grinders a ripoff of Rocket Power? Sure, I guess. maybe, but was it intentional? Were they intentionally trying to rip off Rocket Power? No, I don't think so. I don't think that's the case at all. I think this is the only one of the 5 cartoons that's going to be reviewed in this video that isn't intentionally trying to be a ripoff of the Nicktoon that I'm claiming it to be a ripoff of. It feels more like a coincidence than anything else, honestly. This is not me saying that Wild Grinders is a good show, because in all honesty, it's not a good show. I mean, it's not awful either, but it's also, like, just kind of bland and uninteresting. I don't really have a lot to say about, like, the plots of the episodes or the characters. Well, okay, there's one character that I wanna briefly talk about. So, included in this cast of skateboarders is this emo kid named Emo Chris. No, I am not joking. That is his actual name, and his whole thing is just saying edgy emo stuff. Typical. It is the cringiest thing I've ever seen in my life. I guess it's included as like a satire of how emos are overly sensitive or something like that. I don't know, but it's not funny, like, at all. It also feels kind of outdated considering the fact that the show again ran from 2012 to 2015, and I feel like around that time the emo subculture was like nowhere near as big as it was. I think like the peak of emo was like in the mid 2000s, between 2004 to 2007, no later than 2008. So like by the time this show came around, you know, making fun of emos was like kind of outdated, you know? What was the point in doing it? Something interesting that I found out about while doing research on the show was that the Wild Grinders brand is actually much older than I thought it was. The show came out in April of 2012, however, the Wild Grinders brand actually predates that. I've managed to find a YouTube channel for the show, and I looked and I saw the oldest video that was uploaded onto that channel. It was uploaded in November of 2009. Apparently, Wild Grinders actually started off as a toy line, as well as a series of shorts. I did check, and I could find a lot of these figurines online. I could find, you know, listings for them on eBay and whatever. It's crazy. I had no idea this started off as a toy line, and then it became a cartoon. I found a video from August of 2011, which, again, predates the April 2012 release date for the show. And it's like, apparently during that time, there was a Taco Bell, like, promotional tie-in thing where they would sell toys for this show before it became a show. Also, I just want to acknowledge how scary this mascot for Lil Rob, the main character of the show, is. Jesus, man. Apparently at some point in 2015, which was after the show came out, there was a mobile game that was made. However, this mobile game is now lost media. I've managed to find a couple videos for it on YouTube, including a trailer uploaded onto the Wild Grinders YouTube channel. But when I look for the game on the App Store, all I get are dating apps for some reason. I don't know. So then I became even more interested in this show than I was before. The stuff surrounding this show, the behind the scenes stuff, honestly is more interesting to me than the actual show itself. There's very little to say about the Wild Grinders show itself. It's just really bland and uninteresting. There's nothing offensively bad about it, except for the emo character, of course, but that's about it, really. I still feel like Coconut Fred is the better cartoon because it's much higher quality, and also because, you know, there's a lot more stuff for me to say about it when compared to this, but still, this is far from the worst thing I've ever seen on this series. So there you have it, folks. Wild Grinders, one of the cartoons ever made. This was a show that I'm pretty sure I might have watched this when I was a kid at some point, because I do have extremely vague memories of watching this on Nicktoons, but I don't know. Maybe I would see like commercials for the show, but like I never actually watched the show itself. I don't know. But I do have vague childhood memories relating to this show. I don't know if it's from me actually watching the show or if it's from me seeing commercials for the show, but regardless, I have some form of childhood nostalgia for the show, if you can even classify it as nostalgia. This is the only one of the 5 not Nicktoons where I can say that for. This is the only one that I have any sort of attachment to, that like this is the only one that like I watched when I was a kid. I'm genuinely surprised that it lasted as long as it did. I mean, it didn't last that long. It ran from 2012 to 2015, which all things considered is a pretty decent run. I would have thought this would be like an extremely short-lived cartoon, but considering the fact that this is a pretty bad, very obscure cartoon, I'm surprised it had a decent run, all things considered. Ran from 2012 to 2015 with 101 total episodes. That's pretty good, all things considered. And with all of that said, I think it's time to say goodbye to the Wild Grinders and move on to the next cartoon in the Not Nickelodeon collection.